one reason why I wanted to write like the first year and a half of sobriety, I didn't want to just have the pain, the pain. I got sober, book closes, you're done. Is to capture that it's still blurry when you're sober too. We're still learning new things. We're learning how to show up in this world. I thought once I removed the thing that was hurting me the most, my life would be phenomenal. And that's not untrue. And it was also still just as hard and confusing. I had a lot of learning to do.
Welcome to the Sober Edge podcast, inspiration for alcohol-free living. I'm your host, Terry Patterson, functional nutritionist and This Naked Mind senior coach. The Sober Edge is a place to explore the infinite possibilities on the other side of drinking. In a culture soaked in booze, discover the wonder and joy of taking a different path. Meet real people living lives of purpose and passion. Learn the truth behind the alcohol myths and get ready to be motivated, inspired, and astounded by what is possible with the Sober Edge. Lauren Fay's book, Blurred Lines, My Reclamation of Power from Alcohol Addiction, P.S. You Are Not Powerless, is the subject of our conversation on the podcast today. Lauren is a friend. She is an author, a Reiki master, a coach, and her book, Blurred Lines, is a fantastic read. Her raw journey from secret addiction and spiritual emptiness to conscious sobriety reveals how alcohol masked a deeper soul crisis. And she has a style of intimate storytelling and insight where the heart of her book is about self-trust and turning addiction into something much more. In fact, into that spiritual freedom and empowerment that results in authentic living. So this is a beautiful and authentic conversation, and I hope you enjoy this podcast episode with my friend, Lauren Fay. Well, hey, everyone, it's Terry back with another edition of the Sober Edge podcast, and I am excited and delighted to introduce you to my guest, Lauren Fay. Lauren and I have been friends. We've actually met in person, which seems odd in the world that I travel in mostly, which is virtual. And Lauren is here to talk about her life as an alcohol-free empowerment coach, but also as a new author who is writing not only her second book, but also her third book. And Lauren, I just have to say, you're kind of coming into your own energy, and I love that. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Terry, for having me. And it is so cool that we met in person. We don't get to say that very often in our world.
Yeah. And I think when I talk to so many of my guests, now that I've been alcohol-free 10 and a half years, it feels like it's longer than a lot of people. But you and I maybe have a similar alcohol-free date.
So I'm 2 years behind you.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Exciting. Yeah. And that, man, it's so fun to see how when we're in these early moments of, a few months, 1 year, 2 years, it's hard to see what's going to happen in 5 years and 10 years. But now I get to help people take a look back, and you do as well, and see the beautiful way that we keep evolving.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I agree. The amount because I feel when we go alcohol free, it's a rebirth. It's a complete shift in identity. It's a complete shift in how we show up in this world. And there's just a lot of figuring it out. I have worn so many identities in the last 8 years. Um, but they've all been aligned, right? They've all been in the direction of the most authentic version of me because I was no longer altered in any way. But it was really just figuring out what meshed the most or where was the passion, where did that really lie? And it it really revealed itself pretty early on, which was helping other people in this journey as well, because it's so complex and it's really misunderstood unless you've been in it yourself. And so the people who do go through and have their reclamation of power on the other side are the perfect teachers for people that want to go through their own journey.
Well, and your book, Blurred Lines, and I know it has a long tagline. I'm just going to call it Blurred Lines, if I may. It's such a powerful memoir. It was one of my favorites because, I was just like reading it like a page turner, like, this is wild and amazing and beautiful and painful and brutal, as Glennon Doyle would say. And I just like it read like a bestseller, and I'm thinking, "But I know the author, I know who she is, I've seen her on the other side," and so, I know when you first started considering writing a book, you weren't going to write a memoir. So, let's start there and talk a little bit about your book. How did it become a memoir, and how were you brave enough to share everything?
I don't know where the bravery came from, I have to admit that. I have been documenting my sobriety journey since day 1. Well, actually since day, like, 30, because I couldn't be on, social media in the treatment center for the first 21 days. But came out on Instagram, and so I've been kind of blogging my journey, and it just made sense that one day I would write a book. But since I have a coaching practice, I was like, "Great, it'll be an asset to my business. I will write a coaching book. Here's 15 things I wanna teach my reader." And that was safe, right? That was the safe way to go about writing. And as I was progressing through the writing journey, I realized the way that we really connect with people the deepest is through story. Especially with AI now, we have all this information, which is great. We have so much information. And so people are hungry for story and hungry for emotion. And so I started to just really reveal the lessons through storytelling, and it evolved into full memoir. And it's giving the reader permission too to extract their own lessons from it instead of me just telling you what they are. But it was the riskier choice. It was the far more exposed choice. I had such a journey. The authorship journey is a story in and of itself of what it's really like to put yourself out there. I had an extreme like vulnerability hangover after hitting publish. And the feedback is phenomenal, and so it was never, "Hey, I need to tell my story. The world needs to know about me." It was, "Can telling my story change someone else's story? Can someone see themselves in these pages and maybe choose differently in their lives?" And so it always had a deeper mission and purpose, and that's what allowed me to cultivate the bravery to actually write what I wrote and hit publish and release it into the world.
Yes, and you were kind enough to come and join us on the Sober Edge Book Club, and so we talked about some of the responses that you've received from your book. What has been the most surprising?
Well, the most consistent has been I couldn't put it down. That's been the most consistent is I couldn't put it down. And then it's usually followed up by, um, like, "What does your family think?" Or,
I
like,
asked that question. I remember. Yeah.
your family think? But really, it's exactly what the intention was, which are people are seeing themselves in the pages, even though it's not their story. And that's what I really was hoping would happen because that's what I did in my early sobriety was I was reading books and I'd be like, "Oh my god, her too, me too," and there was that connection. And that's what people are getting from it, and it's just that's such an honor to know that it's working.
Yeah, and that very brave act of agreeing with yourself because no one was telling you to do this. No one, the wrestle comes from within as we're growing and evolving. But that brave act to share your story, I know has already had ripple effects. And you were just telling me that, you're going to be featured in some really cool ways and you're getting some recognition for having written a very powerful book. How does that feel? How does that change the evolution of Lauren?
Yes, it's a dream come true, and it is also a big opportunity for healing because there's the, "Oh my gosh, am I really ready to be seen on that big of a stage or that big of a platform?" And those are all just the old historical fear-based thoughts, and I get to actively practice what I preach and work through them, like nip them when they show up. So, I have the gift of awareness on when I've got fear running the dialogue in my brain, and then I also have just the overwhelming joy that I get to do what I love. Yeah, and so it's very exciting.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that it's really interesting because I always say I have no desire to be an author, but who knows? I think it's a daunting prospect. I am much more verbal. I could probably tell a story, a whole audiobook just by chatting, but to write it down, and I have never done what so many people have, which is track my story in real time. Like I have journals, but they're more just a gratitude reflection, just a few moments from the day that helps me feel centered and grateful for the life I've created.
Mhm.
And so I'm always thinking about visibility. And I know that sometimes, like you said, as a coach, I'm going to write a coaching book because that's a great tool. But now that you have written a book, I see, and what you shared before I hit record, there's a little shift between how you're showing up and the way that you're offering what you do as part of your coaching and your services. And how does that feel? So you're moving to more of a speaker role. How's that feel?
It does, it feels more aligned, I'm still coaching and all of that. My dream as a little girl was to be a teacher and a motivational speaker. And I feel like, both of those things have come true. Obviously not a teacher in the traditional sense in the school setting, but I am a teacher. And as I coach, a lot of my practice is one to one. And then I have some smaller groups. And as I'm coaching, I'm just like, these are such huge breakthroughs and these are just such profound, thoughts. And this needs to be one to many, right? This needs to be on a bigger, like to speak it through a megaphone. And so the book helped do that. And now I get to do exactly that, in person, stand on bigger stages and talk to bigger rooms and have more people hear it at the same time. And that feels really cool.
Yes, so I want to reflect on what you shared there because I you said, this is a rebirth and we shed the identity we have and we come out on the other side. But I also think that and to what you just said, it's interesting. I always think there's a bit of a through line between the becoming and the unbecoming.
Mhm.
Because, we weren't born addicted to alcohol. We weren't born with these patterns and negative stories. Some of it we may have been from generational trauma, but I think that what you said, getting back to who you've always been at your essence, that teacher, that speaker, that motivational influence, that person who has a gift to help people see themselves. That's always been there, right?
It has always been there, and I love that you said through line. I mean, for starters, I gave my graduation speech at my high school. I was not valedictorian. I just auditioned for it and I got it, and so in front of thousands. And I was an athlete. I've been an athletic coach. I've been a fitness instructor. And so that whole being a teacher has always been there. It just looks differently now. Like the topic is different, but the underlying current is the same. It's recognizing maybe a problem that needs to be solved or setting a goal that you want to accomplish and just the perseverance and the dedication and the devotion that's required, right, for those things to come to fruition. So it was always there. And now I get to just express it through the lens of, well, on my journey, I went through this really hard time and this is how I came through and got, here I am on the other side. And now that's what I get to coach and use to uplift people.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, I think I was right there with you. I'm gonna be a motivational speaker someday. And I'm
Let's
definitely a speaker because here I am. I created a podcast so I could
Yep,
just talk.
yep,
I
exactly.
remember, yeah, sometimes and early when I created so I had a program that's on hiatus right now, but a program called the Self Experience where I worked with small groups of women and I would put together the topics that I thought were most resonant. And I was like, how is this my job? That I actually created a space where I get to talk about the things that I'm most passionate about and that I want to learn more about. And I get to do it in a community of like-minded women who are also seekers. And I was like, how is this not the best job in the world? In reality, it is.
Reality it is. And, like you said, we weren't born addicted to alcohol. And so we get to look in hindsight, right? And reveal, well, what were we really drinking over? And I think there was a part of me growing up that just had uh, a different definition of what success meant, that I was a learned definition and it wasn't my own. And so it was hard to give permission for me to explore different avenues and different ways to live. Um, and so I drank, I should only speak for I drank over that sense of like disconnect and purposelessness, and not being like feeling like I didn't have permission to actually do what I wanted to do or and that I could trust myself to make those sorts of big life decisions. And so it's just like we get to see really what those patterns are And then once I recognize them and work to actively heal them, I have this job where I create my own schedule and I go all over the place and I get to work with all these people and my definition of success is being fulfilled. So it's really quite neat when we see what was in our way to block us from who we are and how we get to show up today.
Mhm. There was a lot of really emotional moments that involved, your mom and dad and your sister. How is your relationship with them now? What do they think of this version of Lauren?
Well, they've loved all versions of me. I'm really blessed that I grew up in such a supportive family. Yes, I did grow up in a strict military family. I was an officer's daughter, image management. So within very strict lines, which is why the book is called Blurred Lines.
Mhm.
Um, so that there's never been any absence of love or support. There has been some confusion. I'm just quite different than other people in my family in just terms of how I think and how I see the world. But they're so proud of me. There was fear, of course, the unknown of what is the content of this book. And then they were able to see that the mission was to help people and how can we not stand behind that? And that I get to turn my pain into my purpose. And so my parents still have not read the book. They've heard quite a bit of it because they come to all of my book readings, and so they've heard quite a few excerpts at this point. But my sister's read it, and there were 3 things that she said that really stuck with me. One is, "Oh gosh, like, it's just so interesting how we could be in the same situation and remember it differently and be impacted by it differently," that's just a good lesson to know. And the second one, she said she learned some new things. But the 3rd thing she said was, "I understand you better now." And that was I mean, I, like, can cry now just sharing that again. It was like I finally felt seen, and that was huge, and I do believe that's a shift that has happened in my family. They really understand now why I do what I do and why I'm so on board with being as open and exposed as I am, which is a complete obliteration of image management, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And what a gift to have that sense of being seen. I mean, I think that that is a huge part of why I love to coach because I love to be the person that can say, I see you, and how powerful that can be for some people. But particularly when you are sort of the odd one out in your family, like the rest of the family sort of has this sense of how they go through the world, and you are that little wild child or that little girl that shows up differently. And like you said, the word confusion, it's a great word because there's no judgment there. There's just curiosity.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like you can look at someone and say, "I don't understand," and it's not a judgment, it's just really is. I was just misunderstood. I grew up in a family of engineers and naval officers and astronauts and pilots. And then there's me, I started Reiki practice as soon as I get sober. What is that? So ethereal, confused everyone. But the essence has always just been kindness and compassion and empathy, and they've always been able to see that. And it's like how you can't really argue against that. Those are great, great qualities to bring into the world.
Mm. So you're writing a second and third book simultaneously. I love that because I assume that it's like, oh, this isn't quite right for this book. This is going to be better. Is that more of the workbooks you didn't write with blurred lines, less memoir, more practices for people to learn from?
I would say the second book is more in the coaching realm where it's now I do get to extract those lessons that I embedded through storytelling and really elaborate on them more and have it be more of that coaching mentorship type style of writing. But the third book goes back to memoir because really the essence and the theme of the third book is all sobriety, right? I've been sober for 8 years now. My first book, Blurred Lines, ended at year 1.5. And then obviously a lot of life has happened. And really what I want to portray is life is going to happen. But my sobriety is not conditional on my life being easy or gentle or fair. There's absolutely nothing I've been willing to turn my sobriety over to. And that's what I want to really write about in the third book is just life events that, yeah, in the past, alcohol would have been right there in my hand, in my mouth, in my hand. And so really just showing that the power of staying decided is the through line for your sobriety, and so that's the essence of the third book.
That's so cool. Yeah, I say two things. that I think create that foundation for me, right? I didn't go to any traditional 12-step programs. Most of my audience knows that, I just I tried to find a different way, and lo and behold, I made it up and here I am. And now I teach a lot of the things I sort of stumbled upon, but I realized that those principles were out there. I just needed to discover them for myself in the way that worked for me. And there's two things that I say, and one is that I was part of a conversation. It was a Facebook group that I had been a coach with a big company. And so after they would leave their year-long coaching program, they were still connected to, oh, let's have Coach Terry in our Facebook group. And they were having a conversation one day, and someone said, well, gosh, I'm just having so much trouble staying alcohol free. And somebody said, "Well, how much money could someone pay you to ensure that you would be alcohol free?" And I thought, "Well, this is a ridiculous conversation. Like, what the heck? It's not about someone paying you. I know from my own experience and working with thousands of people that it's very different than that." But then someone asked a very interesting question, and they said, "How much money would it take for you to go back to drinking?" And I said, "Okay, now I'm interested in the conversation. I wanna know what people say," because it still gives me goosebumps, but my visceral reaction is that no amount of money, it is priceless.
Yeah.
There's no amount of money that I would go back to that version of me. And the reality is, as you've experienced, Lauren, too, that this version of me, all the gifts that I have, all the opportunities that I have, all the confidence that I have, all the everything that I have, I can create any amount of money I want. And so there's no connection anymore. And it's fascinating.
Oh, so true. There is no amount of money that would
It's
ever.
priceless. This gift we give ourselves is priceless.
It absolutely is, and it wasn't even just like, addiction to the habitual side of alcohol, like, the ritual side, being habitually, behaviorally addicted to it, it was the mental health. I would never go back there, and now I nip it in the bud the second it arises because life isn't all rainbows and butterflies 24/7, but I just would never put and that really was revealed to me while writing my book is sometimes it still just, like, takes my breath away in not a good way on how low I actually got. And I would just never go back there. So it really is priceless, and it is such a gift, and I know it probably doesn't feel like it for someone who's in the beginning stages, but that's why we just have to stick with it and have that fundamental identity shift, like, the
Yeah.
internal
And
shift.
I wasn't, I didn't get to the place where you know, anybody was thinking I had a drinking problem, but I still would not trade this version of me because I love this version of me, and get to keep growing and evolving, and it's just so wildly different than the life that I was living. It was small and it was constrained by a lot of limiting beliefs, and it felt heavy, and I felt somewhat trapped. And yeah, there's still times that feel heavy, and there's still times where I have negative thoughts, but I now have all the tools to move past that. And so, for somebody who is in the beginning of their journey, recognizing that we don't get to 3 or 4 months and then we're stuck in that version of us. No, keep challenging yourself to keep growing.
Exactly, exactly. Just really not even challenge yourself, but believe in the process and believe in what's available. What's available on the other side of the efforting and the hard days and the confusing days, um, that there's just so much available, right? And it changes the way you see things too, because you said, I love my life, I love myself too much to go back there." And when that self-love is cultivated, which is pretty lacking when we're abusing a substance, we wouldn't want to ingest the very thing that's going to remove us or disconnect us from that self-love. You see it so differently now, you know? So I look at alcohol and I'm like, there's no way I'm putting that in my body. That is the least loving kind thing I can do for myself.
Yeah. And I It's interesting because sometimes people will say to me like, "Well, do you think that no one should drink?" And I'm like, "Yes, I actually believe that." But I don't try to be judgmental about it, but I try to remind people like, if you really discover the gifts of being alcohol free,
Yeah.
don't gift that bottle of champagne to your best friend.
Mm.
Nobody needs that in their life. And so I think that that has also been something that it's not like I think alcohol's coming out to get people or that everybody that has one drink, there's something fundamentally wrong with them. I just recognize that we're normalizing this, um, toxic substance that erodes mental health, erodes connection, erodes self love, erodes energy and clarity and all of that for what? And I don't want my friends to be under the influence of that. And so sometimes it sounds funny when I say to people, they'll say, "Well, I think I'll just give this box of wine." And I say, "Well, you're going to give it to your enemy? Because what are you going to do with it? Like,
Right?
what are you doing with it?" And so I think sometimes that, I don't consider myself radical, but that might feel a little radical for people who think, well, it's okay for them to drink. And then I think, hmm,
Yeah.
hmm,
It's like enabling in a odd way because we think enabling is enabling someone that has the problem, but it's like perpetuating, the transfer of energy on something that really carries no benefits. And I'm not on an anti-alcohol campaign. I'm not out here telling everyone it's bad or evil or judging, but I always ask the curious questions of like, well, why is it so important to you? Why is this liquid in a bottle for like the non-problem drinker, but why is this liquid in a bottle so important to you? It's really it was important to me. It was the cornerstone of my identity.
yeah.
But yeah, it's
Well,
with
it's fun to keep exploring I try to insert a little humor by saying, "Do you wanna give that box of wine to your enemies?"
yeah,
The other thing I say that I think helps me just really, kind of share with people how powerful it's been in my life is, sometimes people will say, "Well, it's not like it's life or death." And I'll say, "No, no, no, wait, it is.
mhm,
It actually is. It's death to the life you deserve."
mhm,
And I will stand by that always.
same. Mhm.
And that is such a shift from the me of 10.5 years ago who thought that
Yeah.
I couldn't live without alcohol. I didn't know how to live without alcohol. And so, yeah.
It just doing something so radical like this, so life-changing like this, and then where we do have the gift of hindsight, it's, yes, it kills the life that is possible for you. And it also, it just kind of makes me just wonder and a little sad, like, why are we settling? Why are we settling for lives that are good enough or are working or we're just getting by or it's not that bad? It's like, well, it doesn't have to be not that bad. It can be really great, and it's if we can identify something that's in the way that's blocking us to just having a very satisfied life on this very short amount of time we have here, why wouldn't we eliminate it? It's just like, why wouldn't we get rid of anything else that's in our way? What is it about alcohol? Obviously we know that, we can unpack that, but, um, yeah, just really looking at those things. Why is it so important to you, and why are we settling in our lives?
Mhm. Yeah, I always tell my clients, "I don't wanna leave you at fine."
Yeah, no, me neither. I want your life to be really great, and again, not in the absence of hardship and not in the absence of being in the game and being a part of the human experience, but what is really great is having those hardships and not having this disempowering relationship to alcohol that's going to make the hard even exponentially harder.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm excited when I read the book, I wanted to hear it in your voice. And so you just finished, the audiobook, and it's gonna be coming out in a few weeks. Let's talk a minute about that experience, because I hear it's grueling and can be hard.
Yeah. Oh, I had just so mismatched on expectations, managing expectations. So, like, I thought writing a book, I would just put words on paper, all good. I mean, the story of writing my book is just as much a story as the book itself. My story of recording the book is now just as much a story as it's like everything has become its own story. I went in, I've never done it before. So one, I have no practice in it. I'm also, an overachiever. I like to do things right on the first try. So I did not get it right on the first try, clearly, because I'd never done it before. It was very bizarre for me to walk into a studio with a man I'd never met, who knows nothing about me, and I'm just going to, like, spill too much on the first date. Like, you know nothing about me, and you're about to learn everything about me. So I had to kind of work through just that initial awkwardness for starters. And then it was, and then, there's just the normal things like, of course, stamina and voice fluctuation and cadence and pronouncing your words clearly, all those things that are technical that I had to work through. But really capturing, I've heard my book in my head all this time. I've read my book so many times, and capturing that in the voice. Like, how do we capture that? And I do think, I'm not a trained audiobook reader. And so a lot of the times it's like letting the words speak for themselves. But I think there's a very powerful transmission for the listener to know that it's the author reading their own story. And so I'm kind of like resting on that as well.
Yeah.
That it will be in this case good enough and it'll accomplish everything that I want it to accomplish.
Mm. Mhm. Yes, I think, I asked, Laura Cathcart-Roberts, who wrote Stash, what it was like, and she said because she has some really emotional, parts of the book. If you probably read the book.
I've listened to her book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and so I must have listened to it too because I said, "How was it to go back through those parts that were so emotional?" And she said, "It's very technical." And so you're not as in the emotion as you would be if you're the reader,
Yeah.
which I thought was interesting. So, did you have that experience as well?
I did. When I was at home, like maybe rehearsing some chapters, I would cry, and then I'd get into the studio and it was just so technical. It wasn't void of emotion, but it wasn't me sobbing into the microphone. Uh,
Probably good.
probably good. So some emotion does come through, which I think is beautiful. I learned that from, um, holy moly, I totally just blanked on the name. It was actually a book that you recommended, To the River, All the Way to the
All
River.
the Way to the River with Elizabeth Gilbert.
Yeah, she was a phenomenal, deliverer of technical, and she embedded her emotion in it as well. But then when I would go back to listen to it, like a proof listen, it would move me. And so, again, like what you were just saying with Laura's experience, yes, it's very technical, so it might not be as emotional for us, the reader, but it's going to be for the listener. And then that's when you've done it. You've done it. Yeah.
Yeah, I listen to a lot of books on Audible, and, some voices I don't like. You have a nice voice.
Thank
Some
you.
voices I don't like. In fact, there was a woman that I was trying to follow her podcast for a while, and she has now sunset her podcast. I don't know if it's because many people told her the same thing I was thinking, but she just did not have a voice for how they used to say, people, "You have a face for radio," meaning, you're not attractive enough to be a movie star, right?
Yeah.
But some people have a voice for the written page. It just doesn't sound as good.
Right. It is an art. And it all is gonna come down to preference too. I mean, I listen to some where I don't connect with the voice, but I've shared this story, I believe, with you. I'll share it again. It's when decided to transition from coaching to memoir, I listened to William Cope Moyer's book, Broken. And my degree was news broadcasting. He's a journalist. I knew who he was. So I saw his face the whole time. I was so invested. And at the end of the book, it said, "This book was read by," it wasn't William. And I felt duped. I had
Ah,
just established this emotional connection with him, and that's when I knew I had to read my own book. And there's a lot of technology out there now. There's 11 Labs, for instance, where you basically let AI learn your voice and it'll read your whole book, but it's void of that emotional connection. It's void of that human connection. And I just knew that I had to go into a studio and put in all the time, all the hours, which was way more than I thought it would be, and read this book myself.
mm, well, I can't wait to hear it now that I've already experienced it by reading it. So I'm curious about this, and this is a little bit my own curiosity, but hopefully my readers will be interested too, or listeners. Um, so you're moving into more of a speaking role, and I always wonder this about speakers because, obviously, to become a keynote, it's not always going to be about your book all the time. So now that you've written this book and you've talked about it a lot on podcasts and in book clubs and at reading events and on the stage, how do you transition to thinking of yourself as a keynote speaker where you get to bring the power of your story, your personal memoir, into a keynote?
That's a great question, and one that I actually really had to spend some time with because I had this moment of, did I just put myself in a box by being, alcohol addiction on the cover of my book, when that's not what everyone's gonna wanna listen to. But what it really comes down to, again, is identifying anything that's getting in our way, that's preventing us from being the high performers or the high achievers or the satisfied, human in our life. And so that's how I translate it, is just being able to come back on, first learning how to open up your awareness, second learning how to make a decision, and then third, like the effort that's required to stick with the decision. And really the benefits of eliminating anything really that's going to get in your way. And so it ends up being a very transferable message, luckily, because alcohol sometimes is going to be that thing. But similar to the book, I'm so grateful for my mentor John Graham, who put the quote on the title, or excuse me, the quote on the cover, where he said it's the story of the resilience of the human spirit, which is true. It's a universal message. I'm just sharing it through alcohol addiction, but it's applicable to everyone.
Mhm. And I think too, the idea of the title of Blurred Lines is that we all have those messy places where we can't see our way through, or we make choices that feel like we stepped outside the line and things get blurry. And I think that too is a universal message.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for saying that. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And how did you come up with the title? You mentioned it a little bit earlier, how it came to you.
It has evolved. It was always something lines. It actually originally was going to be between the lines being the lines of cocaine that I write about in my book. Which is funny because here I'm saying it's all about alcohol addiction, but there's other vices in there. The blurred lines came through really quickly of just the gray areas, the messy gray areas, where things just don't quite make sense and we just don't quite understand things and you're doing it one way. And then, so that's where it's just like the blurry parts. And another way that it came through too was there was a moment, 4th of July, I was a few months sober at this point, where I took a photo with my dog, and it ended up being a blurry photo, and I said, like, that blurry place where life transitions are made and you don't even know it, and that was just when you're actively living your sobriety and you're learning the lessons as you go. So, it has many meanings to it, but really it was to capture the messy gray areas.
I love that idea of the blurred image because we strive to get that perfect image, but the reality is that that almost puts us in that box to see ourselves as that version of us, whereas really we're all the versions of us. And so that blurry image is quite powerful.
Yeah, thank you. And also, I was one reason why I wanted to write like the first year and a half of sobriety. I didn't want to just have the hard, the pain. I got sober, book closes, you're done. Is to capture that it's still blurry when you're sober too. We're still learning new things. We're learning how to show up in this world. I thought once I removed the thing that was hurting me the most, my life would be phenomenal. And that's not untrue. And it was also still just as hard and confusing. I had a lot of learning to do. And so I wanted to capture that as well, of just the reality that it is a miracle and it is a miraculous choice and it is the best decision we've ever made for ourselves. And, it's not just, you're not just this perfect polished version of you through the process.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me and for many of the people that I have the privilege to walk beside is that um, removing alcohol is then the hard work begins of
Yeah.
discovering who we are and how to show up and why we were numbing in the first place. And there is a line I heard early in my coaching journey that I'd never heard before. And then it became commonplace. And lately I've started using it again. And it's a little bit trite, but I still love it. And it is that we get to build a life we don't want to escape from.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I agree. And, I just wrote an article about this because I say that all the time, and I think it's true. And I feel like there's so many people who are using alcohol not because they wanna escape their lives, they just wanna escape themselves for a moment. They've been on all day, they've been the high performer all day, they've been the mom all day that has the mental load, and they are using alcohol just to es like, their life isn't bad, it's not falling apart, it's not in shambles, they don't wanna escape their life, they just wanna escape themselves for a moment. And so that's really when we see, well, what one, we know it's not a useful tool, but two, that there's, okay, we need to look at lifestyle, we need to look at energy capacity, we need to look at burnout, we need to look at overgiving. So yeah, it really can reveal so much.
Mhm. Yeah, and I just, was, lucky enough, we went on a little family vacation, and I got to spend time with my oldest daughter who has six-year-old twins, and she was solo parenting over the weekend because, her husband couldn't come on the trip with us, so we were helping as well. But, boy, to look back at that, 40 something version with young children, a full-time career, working from home, balancing it all, husband working from home in this current environment, I'm thinking, wow, there's so many tools that we need. And we don't, I shouldn't say we don't. In the culture that I grew up in the era that I grew up in, we didn't develop tools like this, emotional resilience and nervous system regulation and understanding any of that. And we're doing so much better.
Yeah.
And one of the twins is a little bit more of the anxious personality type and more sensitive. And so, even just working with my daughter to teach her some simple regulation tools that she can teach her, um, we've come so much further. And yet, it's such a hard period of time. And of course, life is going to feel like we need something to turn off our brain. We need something outside of ourselves. And I think the gift and the hard part is the realization that we don't need anything outside of ourselves. But dang, sometimes it's hard to just recognize that and follow through with that.
Yeah.
Because it's not the easy button that alcohol used to be. It doesn't automatically turn off our brain. We actually have to sit in the discomfort. We have to use the tools. We have to sometimes still use distraction and then come back into the moment and stop kicking the can down the road. And it takes a lot of bandwidth. And when you've got a young family and everything's crowding in, we need to hold these people with high regard that are brave enough to start exploring the work.
Yeah. So I actually just got back from 2 weeks on the East Coast at my sister's house, and she has a 6 and a 3-year-old, and they are great kids, but they are kids. It's a lot, right?
Yes.
And so I every time I go out there, I do an overnight. I let my sister and brother-in-law go, get a hotel somewhere, and I take the kiddos for however long. And at the end of the night, I just had this moment where I was like, I get it. I understand why people, moms, whoever, go to wine. I get it. I was exhausted. And all I did, I just sat on the couch in like complete silence where I just needed no stimulation, for a minute. And then I checked out with like a really mindless, I think it was Virgin River on Netflix, one episode. And then I, like, had tea and went to bed, it was all good, but I do have those moments of recognition where it's like, I get why we wanna check out, totally, and so I still do it myself, just not with alcohol, and I think that there's, not saying we should replace one thing with another, but there are better options than using alcohol, for sure.
Yeah, and you started your alcohol-free journey by coming into your body and learning Reiki, and then, first as a client and then practicing it and then become a Reiki master, is that fair to say?
Yeah.
I did it the opposite,
Oh.
all in my head the whole time and finally starting to recognize, "Oh, yeah." I've had this, "Oh, yeah, I also have a body" experience for a long time, but now I'm actually cultivating and learning tools that I can share, that I can use, that I can practice.
Mhm.
And that is a huge part of it.
Yes, I agree, and yes, that is how I started my journey, and I was coming out of always being in my head, and so I got to really experience that, like, that crash of the confrontation between my head and my body where, and this is not uncommon, but where my head was saying one thing and there was this list of shoulds or, and my body was telling me another. And I didn't have enough practice yet learning how to interpret my body and the messages of my body and that I could trust her wisdom. So there was a big like storm where the two just collided with one another. But I really did learn how to drop into my body, and because I did that, I pivoted how I did my recovery. You did not go to the traditional way. I started in the traditional way because that was the only thing I knew was available. I didn't know there were other options, and I very quickly transitioned out of it, not because it's wrong or bad, it was just there were misalignments with my body, and I finally learned how to, again, trust that wisdom and, like, develop my own intuitive decision making on where I wanna go and how I wanna feel and what do I wanna align with.
Yeah, what a beautiful transition and journey,
Mm,
really, of recognizing that we get to keep growing. And I started this late in life, but I feel energized enough to keep going for a while. So I don't think I got cheated.
yeah,
But it really is like, wow, had I known some of this earlier, that would have been cool, but it also wouldn't have been my story.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing your story here with us today. And I really want to highly recommend the book. Again, I also couldn't put it down. I had an advanced reader copy. So I was reading on my computer and I was like, what do I need to work on so that what can I do while I can sit in front of my computer, read this book? And it really is. I'm so glad you're going to continue writing and speaking about it. I think that you've felt the ripple effects. You've seen some phenomenal things that have come out of your bravery. And I think they're just going to keep that abundance and that vibration is going to keep showing up in the world and it's just going to spread. And I love that.
I appreciate that. Thank you for that reflection, and yes, I'm a firm believer, it just takes a spark to light a wildfire, and so we'll see where this goes, but for now, the feedback I've received, it is life force energy, it feels very good, and it does keep me, very aligned to continue progressing forward.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait to see what comes next and also to hear the audio version and just to continue connecting with you and helping you connect with more people because I think this is going to be one of those beautiful books that's going to stand the test of time. There's a lot of quit lit out there, and this is not quit lit light. This is the real deal.
Yes, it is the it is the real deal. Someone said if I didn't know it had a happy ending, I wouldn't have been able to make it through it. So, yeah, it's the real deal. But thank you, Terry. Wow, that means a lot. That means
Yeah.
a lot.
Well, and there's so much power in you telling your story to give us permission to tell our story, and that I think is the an incredible gift. And so I may not have the gift of storytelling, but hopefully I have the gift of connecting you with lots of people.
I'll take it.
All right. Well, thank you. So much fun to catch up with you, my friend, and all the love and all the good wishes for your continued success and the success of Blurred Lines in the audio version.
Thank you, Terry.
I want to thank you for tuning in to the Sober Edge podcast. This is a place for important conversations and a safe place to question everything you thought you knew about drinking. If you're looking for your sober edge, I want to invite you to connect with me at thesobernutritionist.com, where you can grab my free resource, Becoming More, a guide to loving your sober life. And I would be so grateful if you enjoyed this podcast, if you would leave a rating and review, as it will help more people find their sober edge.